When working in sketches, dimensions and constraints are ways of setting the relationships between lines and vertices and arcs. There are 4 common techniques that we're going to be using in order to set dimensions. First of all, we need to be able to figure out how to do a dimension, and that is available through Sketch, Dimension, which is all the way down the bottom, or you can simply press the D key like I do. I can set the dimension between 2 vertices, for example, this vertice here and this vertice here. If I drag straight up, you'll see that it's going to be 40 millimeters away in the Y direction. If I drag to this midpoint here, you can see it's going to be 43.233 millimeters away in fixed terms. And if you drag down here, you can see it's going to be 16.337 in the Y direction. I said the X direction before. I can click on that and then set that to 17. You'll notice that now that I've done that, that line has turned black, which means it is fixed. I can also set the distance between a line and a vertice. I can do that by pressing the D key and clicking on this vertice here and this line here. You'll notice it only gives me, no matter where I move, one option because that line can only be that distance away. Pressing enter. I can also set the difference between 2 lines. If those lines are parallel, it will give you a distance in millimeters. If those 2 lines are not parallel, it will give you the angle between them. I'm going to set that to 35. Finally, I can set the radius or diameter of a circle or arc by clicking on the outside of that, and you can see I've set the diameter to be 50 millimeters. The ultimate objective is to make our shapes that we want to be as fixed as possible. So our ultimate objective for using dimensions is to make a shape as fixed as possible. Let's concentrate on fixing that rectangle. If I press escape right now, I can still drag, if I select this line, I can still drag it in this direction from side to side. In order to fix that from happening, I need to make one more dimension. So if I press the D key here and select from this point here, and let's just use this point here and pull it down to there in 25, you'll now notice that the entire shape is gone black, and that is now fixed in a way that I can't move. Constraints are rules that set the relative position of lines or vertices, and they're available down here in the sketch palette. I'm not going to go through every possible constraint, but as a good example, the first one I'm going to do is the fix and unfix. If I click on the fix and unfix and actually click on this point here, that turns green and I can no longer move that particular point there. If I press escape at this point, I can drag this line, but I can't really move that point. It's fixed. The next obvious one to me that I use quite a lot is the horizontal vertical one. If I click on horizontal vertical, I've now attached a horizontal constraint to the line that I had selected. If I then do the same one to this one and click on this one and click on the horizontal vertical line, I've now created myself a right angled triangle. There's only one more vertice I can play with now. If I press escape, I can see what it is. I can drag this in and out this way. I could basically use a constraint to fix that in place, for example the fix constraint, or I could use a dimension to make it relative to this shape over here, for example. If I basically wanted to do it the easiest way, I could basically use my horizontal constraint on this point here and this point here, and it's now a fixed triangle that fills up that whole area. One of the other ones I can do, for example, is to use a coincident point, and a coincident point basically makes it so that this point here and this line here are lined up in some way. So this circle can now only be, if I press escape, somewhere on that line. It can't really go off that line. It's fixed to that line. If I wanted to move it to the midpoint of that line, I could click on this object here, click on the midpoint, and then click on that line there, and now that circle is fixed to the midpoint. I now have a very confused set of lines and things, but I've achieved my objective of making it so that my constraints have basically constrained the entire diagram. The final thing we need to be able to do is to remove constraints. Sometimes, for example, if I'm drawing a line, and I'm drawing a line out here, hang on, let's just make it a full proper line. I'm drawing a line out here, and I go into here, and I accidentally click there, and down here like this to here, and I go from out here to here. And I don't want that stuck there. I want that line to move this way or that way a little bit more. You'll see I've got this constraint here. I can delete that constraint by selecting it, turning it blue, and hitting delete. Sometimes deleting constraints means that you get rid of all the constraints you wanted. I wanted this stuck to this line, but I didn't want it at the midpoint. What I can use is the coincident point here to make it coincident with there and there. And then I can set the dimension from here to here, for example, and make that 16, which is possibly what I wanted.